Grace Wilson had built her life around one thing, her son, Ethan, after losing her husband, Mark, 5 years ago. She had poured all her love, her energy, and her hope into raising him. They lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside Seattle, in a small house that always smelled of fresh coffee and lavender candles. Grace worked as an interior designer from home, while Ethan studied business at a nearby college. Their bond was strong, the kind that people admired, honest, caring, and filled with the kind of laughter that healed old wounds. But lately, Grace had started noticing small changes that didn't make sense. Ethan had always been open with her. He told her about his classes, his friends, even the silly things that happened at college. But over the past few weeks, he seemed off. He would come home late, lock himself in his room, and when she asked how his day was, he'd just say, "Fine," and walk away. Grace tried not to push too hard. She remembered what it was like to be 21. Sometimes young people just needed space. Still, something in her heart told her that this wasn't just stress or school pressure. Something deeper was going on. It all began the night of a college friend's birthday party. It was a Friday evening, and the house was unusually quiet. Ethan was in his room, getting ready. Grace peeked in and smiled. He looked so grown up in his dark shirt and jeans, tall, handsome, but with a touch of nervous energy. "Big night?" she asked lightly, leaning against the doorframe. "Just a small party, Mom. Nothing crazy," he replied, tying his shoes. "Do you need a ride?" He laughed softly. "No thanks. I'll be fine." Grace smiled but couldn't shake a tiny worry. "Don't stay out too late," she said, trying to sound casual. "I won't," he promised. She watched him leave, a soft ache tugging at her heart, the ache every parent feels when their child begins to live their own life. She made herself tea, tried to read, but her mind kept drifting to him. Hours passed slowly. By midnight, she heard his car pull into the driveway. Ethan came in quietly, avoiding her eyes. His expression was strange, not drunk, but unsettled, as if he had seen something that wouldn't leave his mind. "Hey, you're home," she said softly from the couch. "Yeah," he replied shortly, heading straight to his room. "Everything okay?" He paused for half a second. "Yeah, just tired." Then he closed the door. Grace sat in silence, watching the hallway light flicker. She told herself not to overthink it, but the uneasiness in her chest wouldn't fade. There was something about the look in his eyes, guilt, confusion, or maybe even fear. The next morning, Ethan barely spoke during breakfast. He stared at his phone, his spoon motionless in his cereal bowl. Grace tried to start small talk, but every word she said seemed to hit a wall. By evening, he was back in his room again. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. He skipped meals, ignored calls from friends, and seemed to be trapped in his thoughts. Grace's concern grew stronger. She had seen sadness before, she had lived through loss, but this was different. It wasn't sadness. It was something hidden, something he couldn't say. One night, as she walked past his room, she heard his voice. It was low, shaky. "He was on the phone. I didn't mean for it to happen," he said softly. I can't tell her." Grace froze. The sound of those words hit her like a wave. She didn't know what he was talking about, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. "I can't tell her." Those words repeated in her mind over and over again. Was he in trouble? Was it about school? Or a relationship? She quietly stepped back and went to her room, heart pounding. She wanted to burst in and demand answers, but she stopped herself. She knew pushing him wouldn't help. He had to come to her on his own. Still, her mind kept spinning. What happened at that party? Who was involved? The next morning, Ethan left early for class, leaving his room in its usual half-messy state. Grace tried to focus on work, but she couldn't stop thinking. Every little detail from that night came back to her. The way he avoided her eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the distant tone in his voice. That evening, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The autumn air was crisp, the sky painted in soft pink and gold. As she passed her neighbor Claire's house, she saw her sitting on the porch. Claire was her closest friend. They had raised their kids side by side. Her daughter Olivia was the same age as Ethan, and they often attended the same college events. Grace waved, and Claire smiled. "Hey, Grace, come sit for a bit." They talked about small things, work, the weather, plans for Thanksgiving. But just as Grace stood to leave, Claire said something that made her stop. Olivia mentioned she saw Ethan at that birthday party last week, Claire said casually. She said it got pretty emotional near the end. Something about people crying or arguing. I don't know, college kids, right? Grace forced a small smile, trying to hide the tightening in her chest. Yeah, probably just drama. But as she walked home, her thoughts raced. Emotional. Crying. Arguing. What had really happened that night? When Ethan came home later, she decided to ask gently. "Hey, honey," she said as he entered the kitchen. "Claire mentioned Olivia saw you at that party. Was everything okay?" He froze, then quickly nodded. "Yeah, it was fine. Just a normal party." But his voice cracked slightly on the word fine. Grace's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed everything in her mind. His distance. The phone call, Claire's comment. She felt a growing knot in her chest. Mothers know their children better than anyone. And Grace knew without question something at that party had changed her son. Days turned into a quiet blur. Ethan remained withdrawn, spending long hours staring at his laptop without typing anything. Sometimes she'd catch him rubbing his forehead like he was fighting to forget something. Grace couldn't sleep. Each night she'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had missed something important, a sign, a moment, anything that could explain the shadow in her son's eyes. Then one evening, as she folded laundry, she found something in his jacket pocket, a small photo folded in half. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't clear where it was taken. She could see Ethan standing beside someone, a woman, though the image was cut off, her face only half visible. Grace's heart skipped. She didn't recognize the woman. The way Ethan stood next to her close, uncertain, told a story she didn't yet understand. She put the photo back where she found it, heart heavy with questions. She didn't know who the woman was or what had happened at that party. But one thing was certain, her son was hiding something. And sooner or later, she would have to find out the truth. The week after Grace found the photo felt like living in slow motion. Every morning she woke up with the same heavy thought. What really happened at that party? Ethan's behavior hadn't improved. If anything, he seemed more lost. He would leave early, come home late, and avoid eye contact whenever she spoke. The house that once felt warm now carried a strange silence. One that made Grace's heart ache. One rainy afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at her phone. She wanted to call Claire to talk like they used to, but lately, even that friendship felt different. Claire hadn't been around much, and Grace noticed how she avoided long conversations. Something was off, and deep down, Grace felt the two things were connected: Claire's distance and Ethan's guilt. Her phone buzzed suddenly. It was Claire calling. Grace hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Grace," Claire said softly. Her voice sounded uncertain, unlike her usual confident tone. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," Grace replied, trying to sound calm. There was a pause before Claire continued. "I've been meaning to tell you something. It's about the party Ethan went to." Grace's hand tightened around her cup. "What about it?" Claire exhaled slowly. "Olivia told me she saw Ethan leave the party with someone. A woman. She said it looked emotional, like something serious was going on." Grace's chest tightened. "A woman? Who?" "She didn't know," Claire replied. "But she said the woman seemed older. Not one of the college girls. I didn't think much of it at first, but Ethan looked so different lately. I thought maybe you should know." Grace managed to thank her and hung up, her hands trembling slightly. An older woman. Someone emotional. Someone Ethan left the party with. The pieces of the puzzle began to form in her mind, but she couldn't yet see the full picture. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the photo she found Ethan standing close to that woman. Could it be connected? And why did Claire's tone sound so nervous, almost guilty, when she mentioned it? By morning, Grace decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. She needed to talk to her son. When Ethan came down for breakfast, he looked tired, eyes shadowed and heavy. Grace waited until he sat down before she spoke. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something. I want you to be honest." He froze with his spoon halfway to his mouth. "Okay? I heard from Claire," she continued carefully. "Olivia said she saw you leaving the party with someone. An older woman. Is that true?" His hand shook slightly as he set the spoon down. "Mom, please," she interrupted softly. "Just tell me the truth." Ethan lowered his head, staring at the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, his voice came out low and broken. "Yes, it's true." Grace's stomach dropped. "Who was she?" He hesitated, his eyes filling with tears. "It was someone I knew. Someone who was going through a lot. It wasn't planned, Mom. It just happened." Grace's heart pounded. "Ethan, who?" He lifted his eyes to hers, and the pain in them nearly broke her. "It was Claire." For a moment, Grace didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. Claire, her best friend, the woman she had trusted for years, and her son. The shock hit her like a cold wave. "Claire?" She repeated in disbelief. He nodded, tears falling now. "It was a mistake, Mom. I swear I didn't mean for it to happen. We were talking at the party. She was upset about something, and I was trying to comfort her. She'd been drinking. I thought she just needed someone to listen, but one thing led to another. I didn't know how to stop it without hurting her feelings. The next day, I felt sick about it. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell you." Grace sat still, her mind spinning. The image of Claire laughing on her porch, their coffee mornings. The endless talks about motherhood, it all shattered in an instant. She wanted to be angry, but what she felt most was sadness. "Does she know you regret it?" Grace asked quietly. "Yes," Ethan said. "I told her afterward that it was wrong, that it couldn't happen again." She agreed. She said it was a mistake too. "But now every time I see her, I can't look her in the eye. I feel ashamed." Grace stood up slowly, pacing the room. She didn't yell, though her emotions swirled inside her. "Ethan, you made a serious mistake. But hiding it has only made things worse. You can't run from this forever." "I know," he whispered. "I just didn't want to hurt you." Grace turned toward him, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, the truth always hurts less than lies. I wish you'd told me earlier." That day, she couldn't focus on anything. She sat by the window for hours, watching the rain fall, thinking about everything that had changed in one moment. She thought about how close she and Claire had been, how many memories they shared. It wasn't just a betrayal between two people. It was the collapse of a friendship she had built over years of trust. Later that evening, she got a text from Claire. It read simply, "Can we talk?" Grace stared at the screen, unsure whether to respond. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part of her needed closure. She agreed to meet her the next morning at a quiet cafe. When she arrived, Claire was already there, looking nervous and pale. For a while, they sat in silence. Then Claire finally spoke. "Grace, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted this to happen. That night, I was emotional. I wasn't thinking clearly. Ethan was kind, and I crossed a line. I take full responsibility. Please believe me, I regret it deeply." Grace listened without speaking, her eyes calm but tired. "You were my friend, Claire. I trusted you." "I know," Claire whispered, "and I've hated myself every day since." "I understand if you can't forgive me." Grace sighed. "I don't know what to feel. Anger, sadness, confusion, maybe all of it. But what I do know is that we both need to move on. For our families, for ourselves." They talked for a long time, not as friends, but as two women trying to heal from a mistake that had hurt them both. When they left the cafe, there was no hug, no promises, just quiet acceptance that things would never be the same again. That night, Grace went home to find Ethan waiting for her. He looked nervous, but calmer. "Did you talk to her?" he asked softly. "I did," Grace said. "It's done now. We can't change what happened, but we can learn from it. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I'll do better, Mom. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. You're young, Ethan. You'll make mistakes. What matters is that you learn to face them with honesty and grow stronger from them. For the first time in weeks, she saw something new in his expression. Relief. The heavy secret was finally out, and even though it hurt, it also freed them both. As Grace turned off the lights that night, she realized something profound. Sometimes the truth breaks you before it heals you, but without it, you can never find peace. And for the first time since that fateful party, peace finally began to return to their home. After the meeting with Claire, life inside the Wilson home slowly began to shift. The air still carried the weight of what had happened, but the silence wasn't as painful anymore. Grace could finally breathe again. She wasn't angry at Ethan anymore, just deeply aware of how fragile people could be, how a single mistake could change everything in the days that followed. Ethan seemed lighter, as if speaking the truth had lifted a heavy stone from his chest. He started spending more time outside, helping his mother around the house, talking a little more each day. Grace noticed small changes, the way he smiled again when she made his favorite breakfast, the way he no longer flinched when his phone buzzed. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Still, Grace knew that real healing would take time. Trust, once shaken, needed patience to rebuild. She tried to keep her focus on the present, one step at a time. A week later, Ethan came to her in the kitchen. He looked nervous, but determined. Mom, I want to make things right, he said. Grace looked up from her cup of tea. You already started by being honest, she said softly. I know, but I need to do more, he replied. I want to face Claire, apologize properly. I hurt her too, even if it wasn't intentional. Grace studied his face and saw sincerity there. He wasn't that lost, confused boy anymore. He was trying to become the man his father would have been proud of. She nodded. Then do it. Do it respectfully and from your heart. That afternoon, Ethan drove to Claire's house. She opened the door with a cautious look, unsure what to expect. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan took a deep breath and said, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not stopping things when I should have, and for the pain it caused you and my mom. Claire's eyes softened. She looked tired, older than before. Ethan, you don't have to apologize. I was the adult. I should have known better. I know, he said gently, but I'm still responsible for my part. I can't undo what happened, but I can promise to carry the lesson for the rest of my life. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. That means more than you know. It was a short conversation, but it brought closure to both of them. When Ethan got back home, Grace was waiting by the window. He gave her a small smile, one that said, it's done. From that moment, things began to settle. The tension that once filled the house faded away, replaced by quiet peace. Grace didn't talk much about what happened again, but she thought about it often. Not as a wound, but as a turning point. That Sunday, they visited Mark's grave. The sky was gray and the wind gentle as they stood in front of the small marble stone that read, Mark Wilson, beloved husband and father. Grace placed a white rose beside it. I hope you're proud of him, she whispered, glancing at Ethan. Ethan looked down, his eyes wet. I've made mistakes, Dad, but I'll make you proud someday. Grace reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. He already is, she said softly. On the drive home, the mood was quiet but calm. Grace felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope, that night. As she stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Ethan came up behind her. Mom, he said, thank you for not giving up on me. She turned around and smiled. That's what mothers do. We see the best in you even when you can't see it yourself. He laughed lightly. You're too good sometimes. Not good, she corrected. Just someone who knows that love isn't about perfection. It's about patience. Later that week, Grace received a message from Claire. It was short, polite, and surprisingly kind. Thank you for letting things end peacefully. I'm moving to Oregon for a while. I hope someday we can both heal completely. Grace read the message twice before replying. I wish you peace too, Claire. Take care of yourself. When she put her phone down, she felt something release inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but freedom. She didn't need to carry bitterness anymore. People make mistakes, she thought. Sometimes painful, sometimes shameful. But they are still human. As the months passed, Ethan began to grow in ways that surprised her. He worked harder at college, joined a volunteer program, and even started mentoring younger students. Grace watched proudly as he rebuilt his confidence and purpose. One evening, as they had dinner together, Ethan said, "You know, that night, the party, I thought my life was over. But it turned out to be the moment that changed me. I've learned that guilt can destroy you, but honesty can rebuild you." Grace smiled gently. That's what growing up is, learning the hard lessons and still choosing to be better. He nodded, his eyes calm and thoughtful. I used to think being perfect made you strong, but it's not about being perfect. It's about taking responsibility. For the first time in a long while, Grace felt peace settle deep in her chest. She realized that even though that night had brought pain, it also gave them both something rare, the courage to face the truth and grow from it. A few weeks later, Grace was invited to an art gallery event through work. She almost didn't go, but Ethan encouraged her. You need to get out more, Mom. You've spent enough time worrying about me. She laughed softly. Maybe you're right. At the event, Grace met new people, kind, interesting, creative souls who reminded her that life always offers new beginnings. One man in particular, a quiet photographer named Daniel, struck up a conversation with her about design and travel. They spoke for hours. For the first time since Mark's passing, Grace felt a spark of warmth that wasn't tied to grief. When she came home that night, Ethan was watching TV. How was it? He asked, grinning. It was nice, she said, smiling to herself. Very nice. He laughed. You're blushing, Mom. I'm not, she said playfully, though she was. Life, she realized, had a funny way of balancing pain with healing. What once felt like the end had quietly turned into a new chapter. Months later, as she and Ethan sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Grace reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the confession, the forgiveness. It all felt like a lifetime ago, you know, she said softly. I used to think heartbreak was something you never recover from. But maybe it's just life's way of showing us how strong we really are. Ethan looked at her with quiet admiration. You're stronger than anyone I know. Grace smiled. And you're learning faster than I ever did. They sat there in silence as the evening sky turned from gold to purple, both feeling the peace that comes after surviving a storm. Grace knew the past would never disappear completely. But it no longer hurt. It had become part of their story, one filled with pain, yes, but also with love, honesty, and the kind of forgiveness that sets the soul free. She looked at her son and thought of how far they'd come. He wasn't just her boy anymore. He was a man who had faced his mistakes with courage, and as the cool breeze brushed against her face, Grace whispered to herself, in the end, the truth didn't break us. It saved us.